Did you know the Bible says not to put up Christmas trees? It's true.
All right, let's see it.
The book of Jeremiah, chapter 10 says, "Do not learn the ways of the nations, for the practices of the peoples are worthless. They cut a tree out of the forest, and a craftsman shapes it with his chisel. They adorn it with silver and gold. They fasten it with hammer and nails."
So this has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with Christmas trees. This is pejoratively describing the construction of a divine image in Mesopotamia, which began with a tree because that's where you get the wood from. And the wood that was most popular in Mesopotamia was the tamarisk tree. It was referred to in Akkadian as Etsemti Eli, or bone of the gods. So it was the core of the divine image, and then it was usually surrounded with more precious metals like gold, like silver, because they were understood to be more pure conduits for divine agency. And in chapter 2 of my book, Adonai's Divine Images, I go into a little bit of detail about that process for generating these divine images. But if you want a far more comprehensive look at those processes in the ancient world, I highly recommend you check out this volume here from about 20 years ago. And as should be abundantly clear, the end product of the process being described in Jeremiah could not possibly be confused for a Christmas tree.
This makes sense because Christmas trees weren't originally a Christian tradition. They originated with the pagan peoples of Northern Europe. They're one of many traditions that people have invented to celebrate the winter solstice, traditions which were then co-opted by the Christian Church and folded into the holiday of Christmas.
So the story is not so reductive or binary. As far as we can tell from the data, the first people to decorate an evergreen tree and then bring it into their homes as a central ornament in the celebration of a winter holiday were Christians, and specifically Christians in the late 15th or the early 16th century CE in Germany. Now, this is not to say that this tradition sprang ex nihilo from Christian tradition. It is likely an elaboration and an innovation on the practice of bringing evergreen boughs into the home and decorating the home with those boughs, which is something that was phenomenally widespread and goes back to Roman times and maybe even earlier. But the direct vestige of that pre-Christian European tradition is the wreath. That is more clearly and more directly the borrowing from pre-Christian European tradition. The tree is a uniquely Christian innovation or elaboration, most likely on that other practice. So it's a little more complex than this. And there is a legend about St. Boniface chopping down an oak tree that was being used for the worship of Odin in the 8th century, and a fir tree springing from the trunk, and St. Boniface saying this represents Christ. And so the Christmas tree being kind of a replacement of this pre-Christian European use of a tree in worship. But that tradition, I have never seen it trace back any further than the late 19th century CE. It seems to have been something that was created about 130 years ago for a magazine. And the original tradition regarding St. Boniface just has him chopping down an oak tree that was used for the worship of Odin. There's no relationship whatsoever to Christmas or to any other tree or to Christ. I think the tradition has St. Boniface using the wood to create a structure from which he gives a sermon or something like that. So it's a little more complex than, oh, they just co-opted it from the pagans.
Which, incidentally, is not the day Jesus was born.
Hopefully this is not news to anyone.
Obviously, I don't think there's anything wrong with putting up a Christmas tree, but it's another example of how most religious people take a pick-and-choose approach to faith, focusing on the Bible verses they like while ignoring others.
So all engagements with authoritative traditions, whether religious or otherwise, involve a pick and choose approach. That's just a function of social memory of the human experience. And this creator actually demonstrates this, because there's not a plausible case to make that the author of Jeremiah 10 had anything remotely approximating a Christmas tree in mind when they composed this passage. But that was the renegotiation with the text that allowed this creator to deploy this text in a more useful way. So the creator themselves is engaged in a pick and choose approach to the biblical text so that it furthers their own rhetorical goals.